Hello everyone and welcome to this evening's webinar. I'm Jasmine McGonigal and I'm on the admissions team here at Escape Studios. So tonight we welcome you to the Vfx Pipeline Explained with Hasraf, who is known to his colleagues and friends in the industry as Has. Over the years, Has has worked on numerous high-profile feature films, commercials, music promos and broadcast series at various studios worldwide. He's also been nominated for several awards, including Visual Effects Society Awards for his visual effects supervision and production work. If you wish to work in the visual effects industry, then getting to grips with the pipeline is essential, and Has is the perfect guide to help you do this. We'll be taking questions at the end, so please feel free to submit any questions that you might have in the chat box. So I'll hand straight over to Has now, but I'll also be back at the end to tell you a bit more about what's happening here at Escapes and the training we provide. Thank you, and over to Has.
Thanks a lot for that, Jasmine. It's a really nice introduction there. And hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this awesome webinar. Okay, so this is going to be a really nice and easygoing webinar. It's not going to be too technical. It's pretty much, I'm just going to run through the typical visual effects pipeline and try and keep it as fun as possible. And like Jasmine said earlier, you're going to get the opportunity to put down as many questions as you want, and I'll try my best to answer them, but we'll do that at the end. So let's get right into it then. The overview of the VFX pipeline. So before anything starts, before any visual effects starts, usually before anything visual actually starts, we go into pre-production, and usually that involves a script breakdown. So usually if you have your own company or there's several companies, they each of them get asked to bid on the work, and that usually involves the company being sent a script, and the script's usually in a Word format or Final Draft or Adobe Story or whatever format they send it, and then your visual effects producer or visual effects supervisor will break down the script. This is pretty much just you seeing what you can do in the visual effects world in terms of like what you can contribute on the script, and seeing which parts of the film would be digital effects and which parts would be special effects. And that's quite a bit of a process. That could take, I've done breakdowns which take 4 days, some take up to like 2 weeks. It all depends on the script. And then you go through the whole pitching, you pitching your company to do the visual effects. It's kind of like pitching for a job pretty much. And then once you win the award, you pretty much win the work to actually do the visual effects. You then end up doing a lot of concept art, and that involves a lot of Photoshop work, a lot of hand-drawn work, and that's pretty much just to visualize the visual effects. It all depends on the sort of film that we're working on. If it's a big creature film, something like Godzilla, for example, there's a lot of concept work. But if it's sort of like a drama film where the visual effects is just there just to sort of like invisible effects, like set extensions or wire removal, then you probably wouldn't need to do all that concept art. And lastly, there's things like previs. Now, previs has come a long way over the years. And in fact, I'm just going to dedicate a page on this actually. So just click on that. Oops, here we go. So previs is pretty much a 3D version of your storyboard. It's like a 3D animatic. Back in the day, there would just be simple blocks moving along really crudely. These days, they're like fully animated films, and they're amazing because they really help the client understand what the shots are going to look like before someone actually goes on set and shoot it. So it's very useful. Usually in the previs stage, you have a 3D generalist. So these are someone that would do the modeling, lighting, texturing. This is sort of like game graphics, right? We're not talking full-on, beautifully textured, rendered things. Then you have animators, and they're the guys and girls that would animate the camera, animate the characters, and animate the scene. And then you have the editor that would cut the sequence. So this is pretty much the previs team. The previs team mainly in terms of skill set. So if you wanted to get into previs, I would advise you to really get to grips with how to animate cameras and understand cinematography, because you're pretty much previewing what the film would be like in terms of shooting and angles. So it's very important to have a good grasp of cinematography and animation. A couple of examples of previous companies like Envisage down here, which I worked at, and Third Floor, and there's other ones like Proof, and there's loads of other companies, but these are like the main ones. Here's a couple of examples in previous that I've done. So this is a music promo I did last year, where the budget was so tiny, so we had to do previs in order to save money. And I knew I only had like a couple of days to shoot this, so we mapped out what we would be shooting. So on my left here, you can see a really crude model of the singer. Obviously, the singer didn't see this, or she would freak out saying, "I don't look like this." And also, this frame at the bottom here. And as you can see on the right, this is my final shot. So it's pretty close. And this is quite useful because I was able to bring these previs onto the set, show it to my DP or my camera guy and say, this is what I want to shoot, rather than trying to explain it. So it really helps the process and helps the whole filmmaking process speed up much quicker with previs. So that's a good example of previs. Still keeping in the same stage that we haven't gone to visual effects yet. There's a lot of on-set stuff. So once you've got your date for shooting, the production company will call you up and say, hey, listen, we're shooting the next 2 weeks. We need you on set to basically keep an eye on the visual effects. So you usually send a visual effects supervisor or maybe a member of the creative team, someone like a lead artist or lead compositor or someone that's really high up in the chain in the visual effects to come on set. And what you would do on set is to pretty much keep an eye on the shoot. So you wouldn't do what this guy is doing here, which is me, like posing for the camera. You would actually look at the green screen and see what's going on. And then I would also have a color chart. This color chart here is basically just to tell the artist, when they do the shot, like what blue, red, and yellow actually looks like in that lighting condition. Then we'll shoot on this here, we'll shoot lens grid. This is pretty much a grid, which pretty much tells me how distorted a lens is, because every single lens you shoot on has a slight distortion. Even your iPhone has a slight distortion. So if you're doing CGI, it's very important that you match as much as you can with the camera. Lastly, I'm sure some of you have pretty much seen a lot of this, or you watch the making of a DVD, you'll see people carrying these chrome balls. And what it is that pretty much just captures the reflection of the environment. So all of these things here on this stage of the pipeline is to capture information to make the visual effects process later on smooth, easier, and accurate. So I think that's the last thing you would do before you actually before you move into visual effects. Once the shoot is done, but before the VFX work begins, you pretty much have to go through an edit. So the film company would go, well, the film production company and the director and the editor would edit the film. And usually you get visual effects shots given to you when the edit's still work in progress. So it's not usually picture locked. So what you tend to do is you get all your visual effects shots that are slightly longer than they should be. So if a shot is supposed to be, I don't know, 30 frames, then I'll add like 8 frames at the start and 8 frames at the end, so you have a much longer shot. And then they'll apply a technical grade on that footage. So again, I did promise you guys I was going to go technical, so I'm going to stay true to my word there. So I'm going to show you an example of a tech grade. So when you shoot something, say on the Alexa, or you shoot something on the Blackmagic or the Red, back in the day we used to shoot on film, and it used to come out something called log image, something that's really washed out. These days everything is digital, but you still want to work in a raw image. For those of you who don't know what a raw image is, it's basically the true dynamic range in the image. That's without any linear color put to it or anything. It's the raw thing. It's like the digital negative. That's the best way of describing it. But for visual effects, we can't really do much with this digital negative because it's pretty washed out and doesn't really look that appealing. And technically, we can't really do much of it in terms of tracking or compositing the shots. So what the company tends to do before they give visual effects shots, they have to go through this process at the bottom here. So you see this little room here. This is my editor applying a technical grade on one of the films I worked on. And a technical grade basically linearizes everything. It's not a grade, it's not a creative grade, it's a technical grade. And this is what a technical grade looks like. So everything's linearized, so it looks nice and pretty and enough for you to pretty much go on and do visual effects work. So and usually you have something called a lookup table, which is called an LUT, which is, see these curves here? That's pretty much what a lookup table is created. Okay, so now that you've got your footage and we're getting ready to do some CGI, we're going to create in CGI assets. So here's an example of a CGI asset. It's a 3D building, for example. It could be a 3D character. It could be a 3D hammer. It could be literally anything that needs CGI. You need to create it as an asset. Usually, in the pipeline step, the sort of artist that would be involved in that step would be a modeler, a texture artist, a shader artist, an environment artist, anyone that would pretty much build objects. It's a really cool job. It's a really cool job. And usually, I would advise anyone that's done sculpting before to actually really get into this, because you're essentially doing digital sculpting, which is pretty fun. Now, one thing I've got to make clear is, even though this pipeline is very much linear, the way I'm explaining it, it's not necessarily linear in real production. For example, this asset here could already start being in production, in terms of someone could have started to build this while we're shooting. They don't have to wait for the footage to be delivered and then we go and build our characters or we go and build our buildings. That stuff can happen while we're shooting. But obviously there's some things in the pipeline that you have to wait in order for something to finish. For example, compositing, which I'm going to touch on in a moment. You've got to wait until you have your footage and wait until you have your renders in order for you to move into compositing. So that's a bit of an obvious one.